Black Friday is a 2021 American horror film directed by Tebo and stars Devon, Sawa, Ivana Baquero, Ryan Lee, Stevie Peck, Michael Jai White, and Bruce Campbell. As if it wasn't bad enough to work on the holidays, a team of retail employees must face off infected customers in order to survive the retail workers' worst nightmare, Black Friday. Oh, 2021, what a time to be alive. Assuming you weren't killed off by a worldwide pandemic outbreak or whatever. But it also led to a bunch of, half-baked movies that I call COVID movies. But hey, better than nothing, I guess. So you have a simple story here. In fact, I would say at times a bit too simple. It does have kind of an early 90s feel that I kind of appreciated. You don't see a lot of retail-based movies anymore, so likely because most stores are either dead or dying. And I do kind of miss it. I do miss, retail culture. I'd say this movie does pair pretty well with Eli Roth's Thanksgiving from a couple years back. Although, sadly not nearly as good. I'll just get that out of the way. It kind of does have a throwback feel in a way. It's got that, sci-fi horror, ambiguous zombie, alien type monster movie thing going on. Not too much unlike, maybe Night of the Creeps. Albeit, none of the charm or style, and, because of that, it's probably never going to achieve cult status like something like Night of the Creeps. I think my biggest issue with this movie is that it's just so painfully average, bordering on generic. I suppose there wasn't a ton of experience in the writing department, being Andy Griskowiak's, feature debut, and it was actually director Casey Tebo's third feature, so he had some experience. So as far as directing and cinematography, it's pretty solid. Everything looks pretty good. The story is simple, but like I said, maybe too simple. Early on, you see employees of We Love Toys, which is the store that our characters work at. I believe it was actually filmed in a Babies R Us, which is like a baby's version of Toys R Us, which Toys R Us is gone now, so I imagine Babies R Us is gone too, but I'm not really sure. But it's the store that, our characters work at, and where 95% of the movie takes place. And you see some of them getting ready to work the night shift Thanksgiving evening while, their families are all doing their Thanksgiving stuff, of course. I think a lot of us have been through this. I actually thought this was a pretty funny and, realistic, quick look at the life of a, the downtrodden retail worker. It's a brief glimpse into that life, but it's kind of accurate. The acting is actually solid across the board. You got a handful of veterans here like Devon Sawa, Michael Jai White, and they somehow even got Bruce Campbell to sign on for this. I'm not really sure. And that was pretty much my main reason for, ever watching this, or at least, yeah, this is the main reason. I was interested in other aspects of it. For me, this was an easy watch, but also in a weird way, kind of frustrating. And I say that because all the pieces are here to make a a super fun movie, but it just kind of falls short on every single level. There's a few funny jokes. I laughed a few times, but they're just few and far between. The whole outbreak is caused by a small meteorite, and that's kind of the only explanation that you get. And it leads to basically alien zombies, I guess you could say. I would be okay, with a generic story with generic monsters if the movie was, packed with fun, over-the-top gore and kills. But I wouldn't really say that we get that. There is blood and gore here, don't get me wrong, but it needed to be more. And it needed to be just a little bit more over the top, I think. The effects seem to be mostly practical, and me, that's always going to be a huge deal for me. But it's the way it's done. It's pretty uninteresting. I love monsters, I love gore, I love practical effects, but literally none of that in this movie draws me in the way it normally would. And being a fan of giant monsters and giant monster movies, I was especially underwhelmed by the fight with the big bad at the end. So I'm giving Black Friday a 2 out of 4 stars. I'd pretty much only recommend this to Bruce Campbell diehard fans, and even then, not really. It's not boring, it's just one of those movies that has no real reason to exist. Not because it's bad, but because it just doesn't do anything new or interesting enough to warrant its existence. It just feels kind of like maybe a half-baked script, or just kind of like a shell of a movie that could have been something, and it just never broke out of its shell, I guess. I don't know. It's just okay. And that's all I really needed to say, I guess. Cheers, guys, and I'll see you at the multiplex. Subscribe right now, please.